Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Phil Beckman. On today's program, we'll talk about business and the PA budget. But first, we're joined by Carter Walker, a reporter with VoteBeat. Carter, thanks for being here. You wrote recently about the statewide uniform registry of electors. What is that program?
Yeah, thanks for having me. The statewide uniform registry of electors, or SURE for short, is the database that the state uses to manage its voter rolls. After the Help America Vote Act in the early 2000s, all states were required to make a statewide voter registration system as opposed to the county or town by town systems that we had before. And SURE was the program that Pennsylvania came up with and put in place in 2003.
How do election officials use the program?
Yeah, so they really use it for everything. I mean, I'm not sure they could really run elections without it nowadays. It's how they register voters. It's how they provide logistics to their polling places, like printing out the poll book so they know who's supposed to vote there on election day. It's how they process mail ballots, applications, and get them sent out and track when they receive them back. So it really undergirds a lot of our election system.
Now, the existing system was put in place before mail-in voting was approved in 2019. How has that impacted the processing of mail-in ballots?
Yeah, it was put into place long before, like I said, 2003. So it was put there at a time when we didn't really conceive of mail voting in the way that we do now. Of course, we had absentee voting, but that's a lot different process-wise. The main constriction that SURE presents to mail voting now is that when a election official goes through to process a mail ballot, it takes them like 10 or 15 minutes just to get that application through the system. Since it's not really designed for mail ballots, they have kind of found workarounds. Okay, we'll use this screen and we'll do it in this way, but still it takes a little bit of time to process that. So that's especially problematic when we see, before elections, everybody wants to come in because political parties have been messaging to them, go vote early at your county elections office, but the voters don't know most of the time. We don't have the type of early voting on voting machines like in other states. So a lot of voters will show up at their county office expecting to vote early. Then long lines will form because election officials have to process those ballots, and it can really create a bottleneck in the weeks before the election. We saw a lot of that in 2024.
You're right about a new contract being signed for an upgraded version of this system. What are the terms of the contract?
Yeah, so the new contract is with a Louisiana technology company called Civics. It's for $10.6 million. And if you'll recall, this is the second time we've tried to upgrade this system. We had a previous contract signed in 2020 for about the same amount, $10.7 million. And that was supposed to have a system implemented in time for the 2024 election, but it fell apart. This one, the timeline is going to be similar. They want to have the new system in place before the 2028 election, and we're expecting to get more details on the specific time frame in April.
How important is this upgrade? We've talked about some of the challenges. I mean, were there issues during elections themselves with the system?
Well, thankfully, this past election, not as many issues as we had seen in the past. There have been sometimes previous to this immediately past election where the system has crashed because, like I said, it's very old, and when too many people are using it, it would just get overwhelmed, I suppose, and it would crash in the lead up to the election in those couple of weeks before, which is a really critical period because that's when election officials are printing out their poll books and such. Thankfully, just prior to this election and about the year before, the Department of State, obviously knowing it wasn't going to get a new system by the 2024 election, they upgraded some of the connective equipment that counties use, both in the county offices and the connections between the county offices and the system that runs on their servers, which it appears did help. It avoided any major crashes. There was a slight outage for about an hour and a half, I believe, in early October, but nothing like we had seen in previous elections.
In recent years, there have been concerns about election security. Is this a system that's connected to the internet, or is it isolated from the internet?
Yeah, my understanding is it's actually connected on like physical fiber optic lines between each county and the Department of State servers with dedicated terminals in each county to connect to it. I don't believe it's connected to the internet, but I'm not an end user of it. I've never used it.
Will any part of this be accessible to the public, or was it just for election officials?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about this project, as opposed to the previous iteration of the upgrade, was that last time they were just upgrading the SURE system, the voter registration system. This time they're wrapping in, it seems, all Department of State elections functions. It's going to be a one-stop shop, they're describing it as, with their election night reporting system where you can see results, campaign finance disclosures, lobbying disclosures. So that's all going to be in one place, which I think it's going to make that easier for the election officials and the people using that system. But they're also saying that they want to implement a public portal. And if you're familiar with the Department of State's website or some of the other places that house election data on our state government websites, some of the data that people are looking for, it's, some might be in this place on the website, some might be in another place. It sounds like they're trying to create a public portal where that'll all be centralized and can be accessed in one place.
We've been speaking with Carter Walker. He's a reporter with VoteBeat. Carter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Tuesday night on PCN.
John Hancock, I think, was an amazing man. He was filthy rich. He was popular. He was handsome. He was educated. He had a great life, and yet he was willing to risk it all, and he was unintimidated by the British.
PCN brings you live coverage of the 2025 PIAA Swimming and Diving Championships. Watch Pennsylvania's top swimmers and divers compete live from Bucknell University, March 12th through the 15th. This year, PCN Select will have streaming coverage of all the action, starting with preliminaries each morning. Learn more at PCNTV.com. PCN is Pennsylvania Sports.
Welcome back. We are now joined by David Taylor, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and Ryan Unger, President and CEO of the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and the Capital Region Economic Development Corporation. Thank you both for being here. Ryan, budget hearings wrapped up last week. We're kind of now in the race to the end of June. What is your organization looking for as this budget process unfolds?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Phil. It's good to be here with my friend Dave. Our service territory and area is Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry County. So we're looking at very specific issues that we feel can help our members, close to 900 businesses here in the region. I think there are some things in the governor's budget address we liked. I think the continued phase out of the corporate net income tax is a positive for this region and for the Commonwealth as well. I think our eyes are on it specifically. We don't want to turn into the similar phase down of the capital stock and franchise tax, which Dave probably remembers well, was a long, slow death march of about 12, 13, 14 years. So I think we're going to remain focused on that. The challenge being that the accelerated proposal does offer some things that we have some concerns about regarding combined reporting, the actual revenue that you'll generate versus expenses, and its impact specifically on businesses here in the region. And some other topics that may not hear from other business organizations or groups. We have some particular interest in some of the child care legislation. We see that we've got an incredibly tight labor force here in the region. Surveying our members, half of them say the high cost of child care is a barrier. Last year, we were successful in getting some child care tax credits. We think continued investments in that area to lower that burden or incentivize employers to try to help offset that are a positive thing here for the region. And then as an economic development corp, we have a keen interest in some of the reorganization that the Department of Community and Economic Development has done, some of the recalibration of some of the tax credit programs, making them less specific. My friend Dave says often that the economy is an organism. We're just talking about in the green room, right, Dave?
It's not a machine.
It's not a machine. And it's important that we not try to just push different levers. I think we saw that in a previous federal administration, and it is not often very successful. So I think consolidating them into performance-based incentives that prove that they can generate tax revenue and jobs is a positive here for the region. And then finally, continued investments in infrastructure of interest to us, particularly site development and the cost around. We have tight industrial occupancy here in the region, and those investments can bear fruit. Keeping in mind that you also have to have a good regulatory environment and make sure you understand what you're investing in and it's going to provide the results that you intend.
David, what are you looking for?
Well, thank you, Phil. I also need to say thanks to PCN for having us on, and it's awesome to be with my great friend, Ryan. We're looking for fiscal sanity, if we could have that for once, because Pennsylvania's state budget has a structural deficit, which means that every year mandatory spending increases faster than the natural growth of revenue coming to the Commonwealth from economic growth. This is driven by our underlying demographic crisis, where Pennsylvania has a large and growing population of seniors, people beyond their working years, people who oftentimes themselves require taxpayer-funded services, and we don't have enough of younger people in their working years to pay the taxes to sustain state government at its current scale. So Governor Shapiro is seeking to dramatically accelerate state spending, as he did in last year's budget, and we're headed for a cliff. And the Independent Fiscal Office in particular noted that continued spending at this level, raising the baseline, that we're looking at multi-billion-dollar deficits in the very near future. And so knowing that is a future that we should avoid. And so, we will be continuing to advocate for responsible spending and not allowing state government to grow faster than the private economy.
Do your organizations lobby during this period? Are you working with state legislatures for and against different programs?
Oh, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. We'll meet with each of our legislators. It usually begins after the hearings, right? And we have our priorities, which some of them I outlined earlier. We'll sit down with each of them one-on-one, hear them out. We have good discussions, good relationships with them. It's our job to be our members' voice, as it is for Dave and as his members as well. And I think also you can't go through this process without realizing that this is also the time of the year that many unrelated budget issues get tackled at the same time. So my predecessor, I think Dave Black, would often say, like, the success of any piece of legislation is wholly dependent on the unrelated issue or topic it gets attached to. So I think we'll have our eyes on a host of other different issues as they seemingly come from nowhere over the next several months.
And, part of our mission is to explain to lawmakers and decision makers why our part of the economy matters, that manufacturing is the sector that adds the most value. And as a result, we have the best wages and benefits in the marketplace. Manufacturing entities are very significant local taxpayers. So that's part of, again, what's the basis of well-being in a community? Having a strong tax base and having the opportunity for family-sustaining jobs. And so because manufacturing is $100 billion of value added every year in Pennsylvania, directly employing over 500,000 Pennsylvanians on the plant floor, that core activity sustaining millions of additional Pennsylvania jobs, this is why our lawmakers, decision makers should be concerned about the health and well-being and growth of our sector.
Talk more about that. What is the state of manufacturing in Pennsylvania? Is it good? Is it growing? Is it declining?
Well, it is. I mean, nationally, the manufacturing sector is in recession. It's contracting. So, I mean, for the most part, I would say that that the manufacturing sector at this point is just sort of steady on. But there are tremendous opportunities for growth, but we have to embrace them. One of the biggest opportunities, probably the biggest one, is regarding energy, that Pennsylvania has tremendous energy resources that are not being mobilized. In order to do that, we need a pro-growth, pro-production approach from state government to mobilize those resources. One of the projects that is very exciting would be a liquefied natural gas export terminal on the Delaware River. We have private sector investment that's interested in that. State Representative Martina White of Philadelphia has spearheaded an LNG task force. And this is a feasible project. This could really happen. We only need a little bit more pipeline to connect to the superabundance of natural gas in northeastern Pennsylvania. And if we did this, it would be an engine of economic growth. It would be an enormous number of working hours for our skilled tradespeople and the industrial workers who would then staff that facility. More importantly, or at least not more importantly, as important, that it would strengthen America on the world stage, that it would increase our energy portfolio, and that we would be able to send LNG to our allies in Europe who are in the process of trying to disentangle themselves from the dictatorship in Moscow. And so clearly this is in our national interest. And as America ramps up energy production, meets consumer demand, we can drive down the global price of the resource, and that Vladimir Putin's regime depends to a very great degree on the cash that he gets from exporting oil, coal, and natural gas. We can literally defund the Kremlin if we want, but to do this, we need leadership. And in particular, we need Governor Shapiro to say, this is a good project, we need this project, this will make America stronger, this will reinforce Ukraine, this will defund the Kremlin. And again, it's a matter of political will.
Have you talked to his administration about this issue?
Yes, all of this is known and public, and we would, hopefully wiser heads will prevail.
Ryan, what's the state of the economy in the counties that you cover?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Our economy is going to be a little bit different than what Dave just outlined here. Manufacturing as a percentage of our GDP is about half of what it is in Lancaster and York. I think the names you would recognize in our manufacturing sector, a little candy company called Hershey, and then certainly some real strong manufacturing throughout the semiconductor industry and parts and electronics parts industry, and then also some MI Windows and Doors and some other companies up in northern Dauphin County. I think our economy is primarily focused on professional and business services. Makes sense. Capital regions typically do that. And in fact, our industrial mix looks a lot more similar to Philly and Pittsburgh than it would Lancaster and York nearby. So when we're looking at our economy, those are the sections of our economy we're looking at: education, healthcare, professional and business services. And we've been blessed in this region. Our GDP has grown at a rate faster than our state's GDP. But I think we've constantly got our eye on what's next. I think there's some concerning trends, no doubt, in professional and business services. Those are jobs are at the highest propensity to be remote, and the opportunities. So we appreciate companies that call their workers back into the office. We think there's some really good data on that. I think a hybrid approach makes sense, but we want to make sure we keep those jobs here in the region, whether it's IT jobs, professional services jobs, things like that. But overall, the economy is strong here in the region. Population growth is strong as well. We are one of the fastest growing areas of the Commonwealth, usually between us and Lehigh Valley as a region, and consequently our GDP grows at about the same percentage as well.
What's driving that population growth?
Available land, property, high quality of life, lower cost of living. I think all those things, and jobs, right? I think also being a professional and business services hub, we see in our region more people coming into our region to work than leaving to work. If they're leaving, they're typically not going to one place, whereas we see our neighboring counties have a higher concentration of those folks coming in. So they're going to come in here to work those jobs that they don't have in their neighboring economies. So I think a consistent and growing education, healthcare, professional and business services, which aren't typical to some of our neighboring counties, as well as those high quality of life, low cost of living, helps that population growth. As Cumberland County is the fastest growing county in our Commonwealth, and they have abundant land, good schools, all those things I think that give you like that secret sauce to growth.
David, Ryan mentioned childcare as an issue in his area. Is that something that manufacturers are concerned about as well?
Well, I mean, it's one of many factors. And again, this is not to say that the issue isn't important. Of course it is. But, the big picture stuff matters most. U.S. News and World Report released a survey, an analysis of the states, a state ranking. Pennsylvania ranked 44th in fiscal solvency, worse than California. And again, that speaks to the dynamics that I described just a moment ago about the structural deficit, the rate of spending increase. Like we are in trouble, and that these issues must be addressed first. And the failure to address those issues first really constitutes a collapse of leadership. So, yes, that issue is important, but it's not nearly so important as dealing with the big picture of that government is spending money faster than people can earn it. This is deeply unhealthy, and that we're headed for a mighty reckoning very soon.
Ryan, what's the state of starting businesses in this area? We often see issues relating to permitting and some of the bureaucratic aspects of starting a business.
Yeah, I will give the Shapiro administration some credit. I think there's been some great strides in there. I think previously there were times when I've been doing this work that a simple LLC registration would take months and months and months, and we've seen those cut down to less than a week. And removing that friction is important. It's also important to remove it at the local level too. I think we're a commonwealth, so the most important instrumentalities for us are at the most local level for development, right? You got to have the zoning, you got to have the infrastructure, you got to have the land use to make that development work. In terms of our own startup culture here in the region, we always have room for growth and improvement. But when we were recently ranking tech hubs on the East Coast, a publication, our growth within IT-related companies was faster than many others in this region, including some close ones near us, like the Phillies and the Pittsburghs. We had similar percentages of tech establishment growth year over year. Now it's one snapshot, right? But I think we're in a good place. But I think we could look for more continued investment. And the ways you do that is you create healthy communities, you create good tax code and policy. I think last year you saw what we call the startup penalty tax improved here in the region. It's a net operating loss, which is a very wonky tax. Senator Rothman, I know, has been supporting that for many years, and now we're at least in line with other states throughout the country. Before it was punitive to have losses in your first few years that you couldn't write off. We've eliminated that, and I think you also want to make sure that you have available venture capital and other forms of capital to help those companies. So it's an ecosystem as a whole. I think we've got a solid one here, but with an economy like Philly or Pittsburgh, we'd love to rival that too.
David, Pennsylvania has long had a very rich manufacturing history in the manufacturing sector. How difficult or easy is it to start a manufacturing company from scratch?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Pennsylvania's business startup rate is very low, among the lowest in the nation, and it speaks to some of those issues that Ryan mentioned about the regulatory state and meeting all of those initial requirements. But I mean, again, a foundational fact of economic growth is that in a free country, in a free economy, private sector investment decisions are voluntary. And so that's why it's incumbent on our leaders and decision makers to make it the smart business decision for people to choose to locate, invest, operate in Pennsylvania rather than in one of our competitor states. And that our leaders for too long have been have taken the approach of taxpayer-funded, government-directed economic development, when in fact what we really need is to lower the baseline costs of creating and keeping jobs. And is to treat the economy as a garden to be tended, rather than a beast of burden to be whipped or a machine to be operated. And that kind of humility is too often absent. People, especially in government, want to take credit for, I made this happen. Well, actually, the best way to go is just to build the environment whereby people can make smart business decisions on how they choose to deploy their own resources. And behind the scenes, we try to help entities that are looking to invest in Pennsylvania. And I got to say that over the last 18 months, there have been at least $3 billion plus investments that the businesses they gave up. They just said Pennsylvania is too hard and we're going to look someplace else. So there's an ongoing opportunity cost that Pennsylvania is experiencing because of the burdens, the lack of competitiveness, and I would go back to the overspending as being one of the main reasons why Pennsylvania's economic growth is only ever a fraction of the national average. And this has gone on for decades over, under governors and legislatures of both parties. And it's a chronic problem, and until we address it, we will continue to underperform, which is what's leading to the demographic crisis of not enough younger people building their lives and families and careers here.
Whenever people think about developing business, one of the tools that comes up are tax credits, especially if they're targeting specific regions or sectors. Are tax credits a viable way to build business over long term?
It's relative to the tax burden. This is not to say that these credits can't be helpful, but it's not a substitute for good tax policy. I mean, the tax credits that my organization has supported have been production-based, which is that the investment comes first, the construction of the facility, the hiring, the operation. Only after you're cranking out units do you start to collect the rebate on the taxes and the benefit accrues. But the investment's got to come up front. A lot of these tax credits, wind up being flipped. And that I don't find them as helpful as good tax policy. I would rather see, lower rates, and again to address some of these burdens rather than to try to manipulate the economy with credits.
What do you mean?
Okay, I just want on the tax credit thing. I agree with a lot that Dave said. I mean, I would love it if we were. I would love it if we were the EU, but I want to say that with a caveat, in the sense that they have a compact at the EU that they are not going to offer incentives to undermine each other. We don't have that in the United States. So I think we've got to be recognize that our neighbors are investing a lot into these programs, and Pennsylvania is behind in a lot of ways in those. And I agree with Dave that you've got to address the underlying fundamental issues of regulatory environment, tax environment, infrastructure, and workforce. No company's coming to you if you don't got those things, right? And I would also offer that as you build those tax credits out, it's critically important, as Dave was alluding to, that they need to be performance-based. And there's some efforts underway to not try to have tax credits in 12 different buckets, for an innovation job creation tax credit and a particular other type of tax credit. Let's put them under one umbrella, make them performance-based, use economic modeling. We have data right now. We have AI. We can see if it's going to perform and generate the tax revenue and economic impact that you would expect it to be, and utilize those programs rather than unused tax credits that are often, as Dave said, sold immediately. Let's make sure that we're keeping that money here and growing the economy here in Pennsylvania.
So let me just follow up on that, because you mentioned tax credits flipping. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
What does that mean? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the benefit it depends on how the credit is structured, but the credit is saleable, which is that, okay, you're getting a credit here, the Commonwealth will owe you this money. I can basically sell that credit to somebody else so that the benefit will accrue to them later while I get the cash for it now. You hate to have to name somebody's pet project, but I think the film tax credit is maybe the most egregious example of that. And again, I don't doubt that there are people in Pennsylvania who need the assistance of PA taxpayers. I don't think that Tom Cruise is one of them.
Well, let's give our guests a break for a minute while we look at programming notes for PCN. Judicial independence will be the topic of a program sponsored by Widener Law Commonwealth. It features Judge Caroline Mihalchik, U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. That's today at 1:15 p.m. The PCN Capitol Preview returns next week to look at the governor's energy plan. Our guests are Representatives Elizabeth Fiedler and Martin Causer. They're the chairs of the House Energy Committee. Join us next Monday live at 9 a.m. Tune in this week for PIAA High School Swimming and Diving Championships coming to you from Bucknell University. From March 12th through the 15th, watch preliminaries and finals every day beginning live at 8:05 a.m. on PCN Select. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. David, you mentioned a few times the demographics issue, and people talk about a demographic cliff, especially coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a reduced number of births. It's affected public education. It's affected higher education. How serious is that right now?
It's desperately serious. And that, again, the longer that we delay addressing these fundamental facts of the economy, the worse the impact is going to be. People can move. People don't have to stay. They're not bound here. We have to have an economy and a quality of life where people want to stay. And again, people go where the jobs are. And that if the economy is performing better in another state, that the job opportunities are both more plentiful and more promising, well, that's where people are going to go. And so I think about, my own hometown and my own contemporaries from my youth, the sons and daughters of the professional people who went up to college and then didn't come back. Well, where are they? They're in Charlotte, they're in Tampa, they're in Phoenix. They're going to the high performing states because that's where the job opportunities are. And so this is why the state competitiveness differential is so critical, and that is an issue that can only be addressed in Harrisburg. And so, again, it falls on our leaders. The future of our Commonwealth depends on them right-sizing state government, throttling back on spending and not spending money faster than people can earn it, and fixing these fundamental questions of taxation, regulation, lawsuit abuse, building out the workforce, all these things that go towards the fundamental competitiveness of our economy. We have tremendous resources. We have, a strategic geographic location and access to market. We have almost unlimited fresh water, which many of our competitor states in the West lack. We have mature institutions of higher learning and financial institutions. Like, these are things that should accrue to our benefit. But the thinking in Harrisburg for too long has been, so long as we're not quite so bad as New York and New Jersey, that makes it okay, and it's simply not so. And to go to one of the issues that Ryan raised about the corporate net income tax, that the plan that we're on, and this is, for Pennsylvania, this is a huge positive change, that we have started to roll the boulder of the highest CNI rate in the country, and so we're beginning that process of working its way down. The problem is that as it stands, at the end of that journey, our rate will be as low as Indiana's is today. So it's the right medication, but the wrong dosage. And that between now and then, there's going to be an opportunity cost. And again, who's to say that the world is going to stand still and that things will be the same on that distant day as they are now? And so we need leaders with dynamic thinking, and that we need to recognize that opportunity cost of what is being missed now because of our underperformance.
Yeah, the demographic issues are a very real one, and Dave's right to bring it up. To give you an idea, I think there's 2 points of data that I always kind of refer when we think about the demographic challenge. In 2010, South Central, Southeastern Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley, the population there equaled the rest of the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that includes Pittsburgh, Erie, State College, Williamsport, areas like that. In 2020, when the census came out, the area down in Southeastern, South Central, Lehigh Valley had 500,000 more people than the rest of the state. That's the significant drawdown in population and attrition there, while the rest of the state was growing at a rate around the national average, but still, that's not. You can win the slowest heat at the Olympics, and you're not getting a gold medal. Like, we have some significant, demographic challenges here in the Commonwealth. And one, I know that Dave's a historian. When you look at our share of national population, it's never more clear than when you look at the congressional seats in Pennsylvania. Yep. We have half as many as we had 100 years ago. So those are all issues that are critically important to address. I know some of our elected leaders are focusing on that as well. But it's not one that you want to continue to kick that can down the road. If you wait to deal with it right until it becomes the most pressing issue, it's going to be too late.
Now, you had also mentioned earlier that the region that you represent, Cumberland and Dauphin, this is some of the fastest growing parts of the state, and yet it's a tight labor market. So what's causing that?
Well, a host of things. I think our labor force participation rate has remained steady. It's increased a little bit. And when we've had increases in population, we have not necessarily seen similar benchmark increases in our labor force. So They could be retirees, you could have younger families, whatever that might be. I can't track it down to the individual person. But what we've done to try to meet the demand of employers is increase our labor force participation and not our labor force. So what that really just means is we're wringing that rag just a little bit tighter, and that, again, is not a recipe for success as well. We're lucky, and again, we're blessed here to have full employment. When I started this work 20 years ago, we said 5% was full employment. Well, we're under 4 now, right? So we're at a place here in this region. We're at an incredibly tight labor market. We've continued to see that, throughout the last 5 years here in the region with significant population growth. I think if we've seen anything that maybe causes us pause, is we've seen kind of a steadying in the wage. We haven't seen the wage keep up with the price of inflation and the cost of inflation and housing and transportation and energy and other things. We certainly have our eye on that, but it continues to be an incredibly tight labor market here in the region.
David, how significant is availability of people with the right skills for manufacturers? Is that a problem?
Yes, and it's essential to have the people with the skills, or at least people who are available and trainable. And I know that the governor's budget looks to add to the manufacturing workforce and help with jobs in healthcare and life sciences and such. There are a lot of contradictions in the governor's budget proposal. And one of those things is that he is looking to mass commercialize the sale of recreational marijuana. Well, if you're working in manufacturing or healthcare, also with childcare, working with kids, you have to pass a drug test. And so at the same time that he wants more people to be available to work in those industries, he's also pursuing a policy which would increase the use of marijuana and thereby render people ineligible to take up those jobs. And again, this is nothing to do with my personal beliefs. It's the fact that in our industry, all of our licenses and permits and insurances are based on having a safe workplace. So if you can't pass a drug test, we can't have you on our plant floor. So that paradox is completely unrecognized in the governor's policy proposals.
Ryan, how significant are institutions like career and technical education programs for industries that you see in your area?
They're critically important, and they're all at full capacity. In the city of Harrisburg, they'd love to send more kids to Dauphin County Tech, but they're capped, right? They only I think it's around 1 in 5 kids around that area can get into those programs because there is significant demand as a rung out of poverty, no doubt. And I think continued investment in those programs is important. Career and tech ed is something that's intensely capital intensive, right? You've got expensive equipment, expensive instructors. They could be making more money if they were on the shop floor. So you've got to make sure that you make those investments with the recognition. And Dave said it from the beginning in terms of manufacturing importance. The economic multiplier in manufacturing is like nothing else. When you see 5, 6, 7, 8 times that job economic impact per job, you have significant downstream impacts. That's why we can have successful professional and business services here in the region, because we have strong neighboring manufacturing in a capital city. So I think making those investments are critically important. I don't know of a single economic development project in doing this 20 years that did not have a concern of workforce going in. And they all want that question answered first before they talk about tax credits, before they talk about incentives or anything else. Can I get workers for my facility?
And those institutions are indispensable, and we need more of them. And we need to help those institutions become healthier and to expand. Things like the Pennsylvania College of Technology, the Thaddeus Stevens School. These institutions are desperately important. But going to the earlier question about the manufacturing workforce and the people with the skills, that we did a tour up at Penn College and in their mechatronics shop. So mechatronics is this very interesting skill where you're basically powering machines as you build them, and it uses the computer software. It's really cool. I don't pretend to understand it. And that these jobs, the economy is just hungering for people with these skills, but ultimately that program is they only have so many machines to train the young people on. They only have so many instructors. And so, you have a program that's cranking out graduates, and those graduates are doing great, which is wonderful for them. From the employer's side, you're looking at that, it's like, well, okay, but we need so many more than this program is capable of training. And so we need to fundamentally rethink education. We need our young people and parents, and we also need principals and guidance counselors to understand that there are really great family-sustaining jobs in manufacturing and the skilled trades, and also that those jobs are recession-proof. That people are always going to need electricians and machinists and welders, but the fact that the workforce crisis is preventing manufacturers today from being fully staffed for the production level that's established. What it means, it's like a cap on economic growth. And I hear from this from manufacturers all the time, that they're leaving money on the table, that there's work that they could bid on, but they won't do that because they don't have the capacity. They can't find the people to add the third shift to do the work for that contract, and therefore it's out of reach for them. So, and another thing that we could do and should do is that as it stands, the Job Training Workforce Development Network in Pennsylvania, it constitutes over 4 dozen different programs that run through 5 different state cabinet departments. It's an absolute, rat's nest spaghetti tangle, and that if the governor would ask the federal government for a waiver, we might have the chance to reorganize that process, move money between programs to maximize the effectiveness of those programs to our needs. And I mean, it's over $2 billion a year, state and federal money that we spend on that. It's probably a lot higher than that by now. And again, we could rationalize that system, but it would require, again, leadership by the governor to ask the White House to get that waiver so that we could start that process of reorganizing the system.
That's a really great point by Dave on that. We had the opportunity to serve together on the Manufacturing Advisory Council with Governor Corbett. The data back then about the demographic cliff for workforce, 1 in 4 workers in manufacturing were over the age of 55 at that point. That has not gotten better, right? So we have a senior challenge there in that workforce. And the second point regarding consolidation of workforce development programs, the opportunity with Governor Wolf to serve in the Command Center for Workforce Development. And that was one of the first steps. I'm going to ask that you copyright Rat's Nest Spaghetti Tangle, because it's a pretty good one. Description of the plethora of programs that are out there in the Commonwealth, everywhere from DHS to Department of Corrections to DCD to Labor and Industry to PennDOT, and across the board, workforce development programs that are all trying to do very similar things, but not necessarily aligned on metrics and on outputs and ROI. And the governor talked about it on the campaign trail about trying to consolidate some of those efforts, and I think it's a really worthy cause. It's not easy, as we're seeing down in Washington, to do some of these things, but I think there could be real benefit. It's the most pressing challenge for employers. It requires some real significant focus as well at the state level.
But there's also a real opportunity about it's raising that workforce participation level, and in part it's by including people who are ex-offenders, people who've paid their debt to society, and that, this is a unique moment. It's going to require a cultural change on both sides of the equation. But through sheer economic need, employers are going to have to widen the net and consider candidates they would not have considered before. And if we can connect people who have been without to the skills that would enable them to take up one of these family-sustaining jobs to care for themselves and their families, that would be tremendously redemptive, I think, for all of us. And I would hope that this would be the next, consensus point on that continuum of corrections reform to try to help people who have paid their debt to society to succeed now that they're out. And I think this is perfectly consistent with Attorney General Sunday and his agenda of accountability and redemption. And that, but again, on the employer side, there's got to be a recognition that people are coming from very fragile backgrounds, that these are people who are one car repair away from having their entire the personal finances fall apart. And so employers are going to have to do more work to care for the employees, to help them to level up. And again, this is one of the reasons why, and I hate to be this guy, but nobody else is saying what is obvious to me, that the temptation of recreational drug use would be fatal to those hopes. And so if getting high cannot be more important than having a family-sustaining job. And so for people who are from these marginal backgrounds, to lead them into temptation is just, especially for more money for government, like that's just completely unacceptable. We need to focus on what matters, and what matters is helping people who have been without to attain family-sustaining work.
President Trump has been pushing forward tariffs on our neighbors Canada and Mexico. Canada is Pennsylvania's number one foreign trading partner, $4.5 billion last year of exports. How will that impact Pennsylvania businesses?
Well, it depends on how it's handled. And, at the moment, President Trump is treating our friends pretty roughly. And especially, our organization works closely with the Canadian consulate, and so this is unpleasant. I think the Canadians don't deserve this kind of rough treatment. But I mean, the overall principle of reciprocity needs to govern U.S. policy. That insofar as other countries are erecting barriers to limit U.S. exports, that the U.S. should repay in kind, to say, look, we're going to erect commensurate barriers in our country to your exports to us. I think that policy just makes common sense. And but for manufacturers, one of our challenges is that, of course, in any manufacturing process, you're taking raw materials or component parts, going through a multi-stage process to yield a finished good. Oftentimes, one or more of those inputs is not available domestically. And so if a manufacturer has to import one of those elements of their process, what will it do to their costs if there's no domestic alternative, and that input is put under tariff? So in the president's first term, this specific concern was not managed very well, and that U.S. Department of Commerce basically didn't know what it was doing when it was issuing or failing to issue waivers and exemptions. So again, the principle of reciprocity is important. We need to open up foreign markets for U.S. exports, for our manufacturing sector. But at the same time, there's the reality of interconnectedness, and that the president and his administration hopefully will recognize that.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to gather information from our members. I think from our perspective, these supply chains weren't built overnight, so to ask for them to be rebuilt overnight is not the best strategy for us now. Businesses crave predictability. They crave certainty. And right now we're in pretty uncertain times. So I think being thoughtful about what this looks like for kind of an Industrial Revolution 2.0 makes sense. But we need to do it in a measured approach that recognizes that we've built these global supply chains over the years. You're not going to change them overnight.
We only have a couple of minutes left. Yesterday, we saw a significant decline in the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, and NASDAQ. Is there concern about a recession?
I think the president himself said that there's concern about recession. And so in the first term, President Trump enacted the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and mobilized American energy first. He did those things first to help the economy, to help the private sector, before then moving on to the tariff issue. And also they had systematic regulatory relief, which also helped the economy. So they had those three big factors first to help before they started working in the area that sort of pushed things in the other direction. So the president starting out now with this, I don't know what to call it, the downside of disruption. I mean, hopefully leading to good things with reciprocity, but I think it was a I don't want to say it's a wrong move, but it's making it harder. And yes, in the short term, there's going to be disruption, and I think the markets are reflecting that.
Yeah, I tend to not want to make decisions based, day over day with the stock market, but I think the one stock market does give you a window is into investor confidence, right? And the economy is not only a money game, it's a mind game as well. So as Dave was articulating, having confidence in a tax and regulatory system are critically important because people will invest. And right now, uncertainty reigns. People are going to pull back investments. They're going to be less willing to put their money on the line in the current climate.
Well, David Taylor is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and Ryan Unger is the president and CEO of the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and the Capital Region Economic Development Corporation. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Phil.
PCN's Ellen Franz spoke with Representative David Rowe about Pennsylvania's energy potential.
Welcome to our program. As chair of the House Republican Policy Committee, you've been holding hearings titled Stopping New Energy Taxes. Where do you see the potential for increased taxes on energy?
Well, you look at a lot of the proposals that are unfortunately coming out of the executive branch, whether it's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which now adjusted for current numbers is going to be $1 billion tax, which we all know is going to get passed on to the consumer. We have some other proposals out there, whether the governor refers to them as peso or press. Either way, both of those plans will simply make it harder to do business in Pennsylvania, driving up costs for all Pennsylvanians who are already struggling to make ends meet.
How would these initiatives make the prices go up, like you mentioned?
Well, every tax we know on a producer is ultimately paid for by the consumer. So whether it's a carbon tax, which is directly put on those producers, driving up the cost of production, driving up the cost to the consumer, or whether it's something like a state mandate on diversifying a portfolio. If you look at the way the free market has already moved Pennsylvania in the right direction, both environmentally and economically, I think it would be unfortunate to stall that progress. You look at Pennsylvania's progress, whether on the emission side, as we are reducing our emissions in the United States faster than anyone else, simply by a market-driven shift to clean burning natural gas, or you look at it from the economic side, where the natural gas industry is responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania, in addition to generating revenues through the impact fees or local taxes, what have you. That industry is the backbone of Pennsylvania, and cheap energy is a key part of being able to pursue the American dream in Pennsylvania.
How many of these hearings have you held so far?
We've had over half a dozen hearings so far, and we're going to be having several more. We're going to be visiting sites, taking tours of these industries, hearing directly from both the energy producers, but also the individuals that are impacted. We've heard from individuals who have worked at plants who have either been let off. We have heard from producers of energy who have had to abandon their plants because of the instability of Pennsylvania's energy climate. When they don't know whether or not they're going to have $1 billion tax slapped them on or not, when they don't know whether or not a permit will be granted or it'll be stalled in DEP for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then they're just going to simply take their investment to another state where they can get their power plant up and running. They're going to get cheaper product to their consumers. When they know they can do that, they have stability in Ohio, they have stability in West Virginia. They don't have stability in Pennsylvania. And that's what we're aiming to do, is make sure we can bring stability for this industry that is integral to Pennsylvania's economy.
Who are the people that are testifying at these hearings?
We'll bring in everything from industry experts or policy wonks. We'll bring in people from outside of the state who can talk to us from a 10,000-foot view. And we'll talk all the way to the local employee or the mom and pop shop that is directly impacted by these policy decisions that are coming down from the executive branch. When you look at what's happening in other states, specifically when you look at what the Canadian premier said, when he said he will shut the power off to the United States with a smile on his face. His quote was that Americans need to feel the pain. The United States is one of the largest energy producers in the world, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is the second largest energy producer in the country. No foreign power should ever be able to threaten the people of Pennsylvania by turning off the lights to make us feel the pain, as he said. There should be nobody who should be able to tell the people of the United States that they're going to turn off their lights in their hospitals, in their homes, at their small businesses, especially when in the United States, we have trillions of dollars in natural resources, but we could be generating homegrown energy rather than exporting our energy to other countries and importing Chinese-made solar panels.
Do we know how much energy is coming from Canada that goes to Pennsylvania?
Well, when you look at the grid interconnectivity, it's very hard to measure exactly how much comes from one end, how much comes from the other. But we do know that the PJM grid, which is encompasses all of Pennsylvania, as well as New Jersey, Maryland, it also covers parts of Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan. We know that Pennsylvania has the capacity to generate enough power for the entire grid, making America a truly energy independent nation that doesn't need to rely on the goodwill of foreign powers just to keep our lights on.
Lastly, how do you respond to concerns about mitigating climate change?
Well, when you look at what is happening with natural gas, whether it's on the emission side, where, as I said, we've already reduced our emissions faster than any other country in the Paris Climate Accords, despite the fact that we're still generating our own energy. You look at European countries where they have completely outsourced their energy production. They're driving their ratepayers' costs through the roof. And sure, they've lowered their emissions, but they've also lowered their energy production. We've managed to do both. We've been able to increase production and lower emissions. And when you look at the impact fees that is put on energy producers in Pennsylvania, that impact fee has generated almost $3 billion for county, local, and municipal governments to use for things like park projects or conservation projects or stream bank stabilization, building out riparian buffers, what have you. Those projects that make Pennsylvania a more beautiful place to live, that keeps our streams clean, that keeps our forests full of plentiful wildlife for our hunters and our sportsmen, those projects only happen because of the impact fees that the natural gas industry drives. If we drive out the natural gas industry, we're going to drive away those revenues and lose the opportunity to make progress both economically and environmentally.
Representative David Rowe, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes today's show. Join us this week for PIAA High School Swimming and Diving Championships coming to you from Bucknell University. From March 12th through the 15th, watch preliminaries and finals every day beginning live at 8:05 p.m. or a.m. on PCN Select. I'm Phil Beckman. Thanks for watching.